Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the One Thing podcast. I am here today with Keith Ferrazzi, who is a renowned executive team coach, keynote speaker, influential thought leader, and founder of Ferrazzi Greenlight, where he has spent more than 20 years coaching Fortune 500 companies and unicorn startups. You may all already know him from his best-selling books, Never Eat Alone and Who's Got Your Back. But today we have the privilege of getting to talk to him about his newest book, Never Lead Alone, 10 Shifts from Leadership to Teamship. So excited to have you today, Keith.
Nikki, I've been looking forward to this. I bet this is going to be a lot of fun.
This is going to be we're definitely going to have a lot of fun. We were chatting before we jumped on here, and I said there's a true difference between interviewing authors who are true practitioners and interviewing authors who study a subject but have never actually used it in day to day, i.e. people who have been entrepreneurs, built companies, consulted companies, or people who research and write for a living. And I'd love to share the story of what prompted you to end up writing this particular book in the first place. You had such an amazing success. I feel like it could be intimidating to try to go after another one after Never Eat Alone.
Well, thank you for that. And, you've skipped a couple of books that I've written. One of them, aside from Who's Got Your Back, a great book called Leading Without Authority, another one called Competing in the New World of Work. But you're right. I mean, Never Eat Alone, my first book, has eclipsed all my other books in terms of sales and prominence, etc. Interestingly enough, I have always written books because I wanted to be a student of something. So when the pandemic hit, I called Harvard Business School and said, I want to write a book around what are the shifts of ways of working that we're learning during the pandemic. And I wrote a book called Competing in the New World of Work. And anytime I want to learn something, I say, I'm going to write a book on it. Sometimes my books take me 5, 10, 15 years to write. This particular book has been steeping for 20 years. My core business, what I do for a living, is coach executive teams. You mentioned originally, we coach some of the more prominent brands in the Fortune 50, some well-known unicorns, even governments now. I'm heading over to Bhutan in the work of the transformation of that country. And cool. In the process of that, I've always felt that our unique approach to coaching team transformation, it was proprietary. I'm embarrassed to say I've been scarcity minded. The book that I'm now about to publish is a book that I have been using to curate and coach our own coaches, to teach our own coaches how to coach, to bring to all of our clients. And there was a piece of me in the back of my head that said, why do I want to release our special sauce of how to help a team be transformational when, now thousands and tens of thousands of coaches will just use our methodology? And I realized that was really scarcity minded. And from an abundance perspective, I wanted to make sure that everything we know about coaching high performing teams was offered and given away to the business community.
Well, and then I somehow convinced you to come on this podcast and giving me more of your secrets away. So here we go.
I've reversed my point of view. Once I'm out, once the what do they say? Once the cattle are out of the barn, then we're going for it big time. So this is exciting. I do think this is to me missionary. I think that there's a massive unlock in a short set of practices that could change, a massive unlock to high performing teams. It's one thing to focus on leaders giving feedback. It's another thing to get your team to give each other feedback. It's one thing to focus on leaders holding a team accountable. It's another thing to get a team to hold each other accountable. We can free up 30% of an entrepreneur or a leader's time, and we can get teams to step up and deliver like they've never delivered before with some simple change of practices. And that's what the book's all about.
Well, I'm not going to leave everybody hanging on what those simple change of practices are. Here we talk about actual practitioner, which I want to get to in a second. But my first question that I love to hear from people who consult really high level leaders and really high level companies like you do, I'd love to hear what is the impetus for most of them bringing you in? Because I think there's often a question around why bring in a consultant when you're this big company, presuming that the people who are leading in that capacity, like, kind of know what they're doing. And yet they're bringing in consultants. What is it that's usually causing them to pick up the phone and call you, Keith?
It's a great question. When I was a consultant, I don't consider myself a consultant any longer. When I was a consultant, I was at Deloitte. I was the chief marketing officer of Deloitte, but prior to being kicked into overhead, I was actually running the growth practice of Deloitte, coaching organizations through sales and marketing transformations. Consulting to me is one thing. and a lot of good reasons to hire consultants when you don't have the bandwidth, when you're looking for expertise in a particular category that you may not have, et cetera. But what I am as a coach, and what I think most entrepreneurs, most leaders don't recognize, is that we all need to have coaches. And the reason is, and by the way, you don't have to pay for them. Part of what I try to teach in this book is the team should be each other's coach. And that's a shift, right? From your boss holds you accountable to your team holds you accountable. Your team gives you feedback. So I believe that there's an abundance of coaching around us that we're not tapped into. And a lot of it is hubris. A lot of it is old mindsets that criticism is wrongdoing. And the reality is that if we all want to be seekers, if we all want to work as a group to push each other higher, I call it co-elevate, collaborate and push each other higher, then we've got to open up a new social contract. The social contract says, I, of course, am going to give you feedback because I won't let you fail.
Right.
And I believe that people bring coaches in because they're just constantly wanting to up their game. There's not a golfer out there or a professional athlete out there that doesn't have a coach. So why wouldn't why wouldn't we all want to be the highest performing professional athlete possible? Now, this niche that I've created over 20 years is coaching teams. I don't coach executives. I've often been called by executives to say, I'm looking for a coach. And I say, I give them names of other individuals, but I coach your team. I coach how your team interdependently works with you and the team itself so that we can put a booster rocket on our outcomes. And that's kind of new. A lot of times people will do a leadership offsite, but at the same time, having such episodic focus on team performance leads silos, people talking behind each other's backs, leading people just, not really getting the benefit of the inclusive voices that are looking at their work and having opportunities to advance innovation and breed bigger ideas than they would have had themselves. And even just the cycle time of getting done. If the entire organization is constantly bulletproofing and stress testing what each other is doing, the cycle time to landing the plane is so much faster. So there's so many reasons why this model is effective. And it's, a couple of conversations with me usually gets a leader to say, damn, I want to try this.
Yeah. Well, I'd love for you to start. I want to get into the actual tactics, but I think what would be most helpful is getting an understanding of what people are doing wrong. Because I think you have so many people who have great intentions to lead their team well, and they just cannot understand why the team isn't driving, why it's not working. They've got a bunch of smart people who just don't seem to be coming together. And I bet that that's obviously when they're calling you. So what are they doing wrong? And then how do you get them on track?
So the book covers what we call 10 shifts from traditional team behavior to real co-elevating teamship. And one of those shifts is from conflict avoidance to candor, probably one of the greatest. I would always put $1 on a team and invest in a team or a company where they had what I call a challenge culture. A challenge culture is when people will always speak up because we refuse to let each other fail. We refuse to let our points of view be spoken behind people's backs. Everything's on the table and we're figuring it out together, and we're figuring it out fast, and we're figuring it out bold, and we're figuring it out creative. That is a very difference. Early on, I in 20 years now, I've had the luxury of sitting in on so many different teams like Jeff Bezos's team in the earlier days at Amazon, and watching the candor and the transparency of that team and some of their work practices night and day compared to some of the old stodgy organizations. And now you start looking at some of these hot unicorn companies. And, another shift, it's chapter 6 of the book. So chapter 3 is about candor. Chapter 6 of the book is, are we applying modern day collaboration tactics? Most organizations use meetings as their mechanism of collaboration. You go to see these kids starting businesses out of Stanford, and you say to them, hey, there's a problem, let's have a meeting. They would look at you and say, how do we have a meeting on it? We haven't collaborated yet. Collaboration happens in collaborative software. It happens in the cloud. It gets multiple people wrestling ideas. Collaboration software, people are more courageous than in a room of 12 people. Yep. In a room of 12 people, 4 people think that they're heard. When people are collaborating asynchronously, where they're thoughtful and they're not being put on the spot, 10 people think they're heard. So and the cycle times, typically, if you start a conversation in a meeting, it takes multiple meetings till you land the plane. If you've started the conversation before the meeting and everybody knows everybody's point of view, where the disagreements are, you have one meeting to land the plane. So cycle times are faster. That's why these innovative young companies who are using technology to do their collaboration are so much more fast and disruptive. So those are two shifts of the 10. We could go through a number of others, but we go from an old way of working that we have documented only 15% of teams actively are high-performing teams.
What I'd love for you to expand on here, and I think one of the big challenges I hear when working with teams, when working with companies, is you talk about this idea of radical candor, as we've often heard it called in mainstream. And yet a lot of people aren't prepared to receive that. It can feel like it's abrasive, or it can feel like I've done something wrong. So how do you suggest somebody brings this into their organization, actually creates a culture around it? Because if you're not used to it, I could see how it could just cause somebody to clam up. Does that just mean you have the wrong person, or do you have to teach them how to do it?
So the book has, every chapter starts with a hero story where we see the particular shift coming to life in a company, in a leader, in a team. So people get to see how best practice looks like. It's pretty short. Then we jump right to what we call a red flag rule. So one of the red flag rules for that particular chapter is we speak courageously. We speak courageously. Now, you have a conversation with the team that says, do we or do we not speak courageously? The other thing that's in the book is a few questions for each chapter that you can use, a diagnostic question. One of the questions is, we challenge each other when it's risky to do so. The average team on a scale of 0 to 5 is 2.4. Now, when a team gets this book, they read the chapter on candor, they take the diagnostic, they see that they have low candor in the team, and then they say, okay, this isn't professional. We needed to be better. Let's go and try some of these practices on. So one of the practices, which I think is a superfood, is, and if you're really looking for something very specific, all of us in our meetings have report outs where somebody in the team is doing something and they come into the executive team and they're like, okay, I'm reporting out on this initiative. Here's what we've been doing. Here's where we're going, et cetera. And then typically, though, because of the social contract, most people aren't paying a lot of attention. A few people who might be dialed in because it's adjacent or there's a turf issue the leader, of course, is listening, but the average teammate is like DMing or whatever.
Say they're on Zoom, so they're looking at something
exactly.
else.
They're sitting here doing something else, texting. So what we do is we say in advance, okay, while your peer is going to be giving this presentation, all of you will be asked afterward to answer the following 3 questions. What challenges do you have that this person may be missing? What innovations or cool ideas might you offer them? And is there anything that they've said that you'd offer to help? And you open up a Google Doc or a Teams room, and everybody adds their feedback real time while that conversation is being had. So now what you're doing is what you would have wanted to have, which is the team leaning in, wrestling ideas, pushing each other, coming up with help, offerings, etc. You've turned into an assignment. So the assignment of turning a report out to something that we call stress testing. So now on in, people don't give report outs. They are teed up for stress testing. So they give their report outs, but they're going to get feedback in the form of very candid dialogue that's stress testing. And when we find out that we have renegotiated the social contract up front that says we're doing this in service of the person. Now, the one thing around this is very important. You asked about the people not wanting to accept candor. The reason we don't accept candor is because every time we've ever gotten it in our lives, it came with an expectation we had to do something with it.
Ooh.
When your mom said to you, comb your hair, it wasn't a piece of advice. It was a dictation. When your teacher said something to you, when your coach, when your whatever said something to you, it was a direction. In the world of peer-to-peer feedback, we have to recognize that all of that information is data.
Right.
The person giving it is not giving a directive. The person receiving it doesn't have to feel defensive. It's not a directive. It's data. And what we have to do is unleash all the data in a passive way, and then the person can analyze it and make a choice of what to do. Now, because the data is transparent and everybody gets to see it, the benefit of the leader is if this person consistently gets good data and isn't doing anything about it, then the leader can step in and make a corrective action. But we've got to renegotiate the passion and the fear around receiving feedback. It doesn't mean you're being told what to do. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I can see where so often, especially if you're in a really big company and you're giving these updates that are often required in those big ecosystems, it probably feels like you're in a vacuum a bit, and it doesn't feel, to your point, outside of the direct team who you're probably talking to anyway, wherein it affects. You're sort of just talking to the ether. You're giving this update that you likely put effort into building, and everyone's nodding at you while they're doing something else, and you're like, "Why are we here? And what are we doing with this information?" So this actually gives everyone a directive on here's what we're here to do and here's why we're giving it. I absolutely love that. It's a great piece of advice.
And that's just one. So there's 37 practices in the book aligned to 10 distinct shifts. The Candor practice has this shift in it called stress testing. There's other practices like something called a Candor break. A Candor break is in the middle of a heated conversation. Anybody has the opportunity to say, can we do a Candor break? And a Candor break means everybody goes into groups of two, whether just turn to the person next to you or go into a breakout room. And in that conversation, you say, what is not being said in the room that should be said? Mm. And then you come back into the room and you restart the conversation. And everybody goes around saying what's not being said. That simple practice is game changing for a lot of conflict avoidant teams. Once again, what you're doing is you're turning what the culture is you wish you had into a quick assignment. Right. Another, I mean, I'm giving you multiple practices. There's so many different practices in each of the chapters, but I'll give you one other ones. I call it a Yoda in the room. So Yoda is what I call a business safe word. If you look behind here, I've got little Yoda things here.
Do you have to wear the ears when you call a Yoda?
You don't have to use you don't have to wear the ears, but probably could be fun. So the Yoda in the rooms means when I'm feeling that I want to say something that's a risk, that's going to take a risk, I want to raise my hand and I want to have a contract with the group. Yoda moment. Now, why I call it Yoda is I think that character is all wise, all perfect knowing, but I believe all teams are all of that, just not one person. So if we get everybody's information on the table, we'll have the wisdom of Yoda. So if somebody says Yoda moment, here's what we're missing. Yoda moment, I think that's off base. Yoda moment, we've gotten whatever it is, it's a safe word that says, now's the time that I get to take a risk and the team recognizes, because we have a social contract around it, that they're going to cut you a break for it. So again, just another simple practice. So every shift has a set of simple practices. Now we've spent 20 years curating those practices, teaching them and coaching them into teams. And we measure the movement of those practices. We measure the movement on diagnostics and we correlate it to outcomes. I know that every practice that's in that book is what's called an HRP, a high return practice. We measured each of those practices making a difference in teams' lives.
Is there any of those HRPs that's like the HRP?
I actually think the reason I gave you stress testing is it's probably one of the greatest. I'm writing a piece right now on HBR about it because it really, if you think about stress testing, it's embodied in that is I got your back. Embodied in that is courage and candor. Embodied in that is offers of help. So there's so much of what kind of culture we want in organizations built into practice, that particular practice. But I'll give you another one. In an era where we're spending less time in the office than we used to.
Yep.
Some of your listeners have dragged everybody back full time, and that's fine. Others still have a hybrid environment. Others have gone fully virtual. No dog in the hunt here. Whatever it is you choose is fine. But we are generally spending less time serendipitously bumping into each other. And if you're global, you're hybrid. I don't care. If you've got two offices somewhere in the country, you're hybrid. So with that in mind, what happens is we start to see an erosion of trust, an erosion of connection that we used to have when we were all in one office together. If you do regular check-ins, called an energy check-in, once a month, if everybody in the team goes around and says, my energy this month has been 2, because mom's been struggling with some stuff. She's in assisted living, or my son is a little bit off the rails at school, or my spouse is giving me a hard time because of some work projects, or my work project is kind of floundering right now, whatever it is. I'm a 2 for these reasons. That energy check-in, the average team has a 2.8 of relationship status between 0 and 5 when they're all working together in the same location. When they go hybrid, it goes down to 2.3, unless you do regular purposeful bonding exercises, regular purposeful energy check-ins. Then the numbers go higher than a 2.8. They go into 3.5 at a minimum. So by virtue of doing purposeful relational acceleration exercises, you can't leave that to serendipity. So CEOs who are saying, drag everybody back to the office, I want serendipity bonding again. Fine, but you should also be doing purposeful bonding so that the team grows in empathy, trust, connection, particularly on a global team when you're being we're all being thrown into different teams all the time. How do you develop trust? You got to develop purposefully. So that's another practice.
As you're speaking, I have to imagine that a lot of our listeners are like me, and the things that you're outlining of what not to do. I'm like, yep, we do that in my business. Yep, we do that too in my business. So I'm getting a lesson on all the things I should shift immediately after this. And yet I have to believe that there's
the meeting one is a big one.
The meeting one is a huge one, because then you also get people who are coming into the meeting who are preemptively frustrated before they've even gotten there because they don't want to be on any more meetings.
It's like meeting cultures are a drain to productivity in society. And there's chapter 6 is all about what I call meeting shifting, where you shift the collaboration from the meeting to the asynchronous, and we only use meetings sparingly to land the plane, wrestle ideas, that sort of thing. Anyway, I cut you off. I apologize. You were saying.
No, please don't. You're here to cut me off, Keith. I want to listen to you. It's much more valuable than what I have to say in this context. And I also want to know what are some of the debilitating behaviors specifically that you see outside of obviously meeting culture that's I'm sure gotten entirely out of hand, especially being virtual. But what are some of the most debilitating behaviors that you see amongst teams? Things that this is a sinking ship.
Yeah. Well, fear-based cultures are everywhere.
Yeah.
And those fear-based cultures do lead to the conflict avoidance. It's the meeting after the meeting. It's the DMing privately. It's interesting. There's an old adage, and I understand where it came from, which is you praise people publicly, you critique them privately, right?
Right.
Well, I believe that there's a problem with that. If we had a social contract that, Nikki, I am so committed to your success, you're so committed to mine, that anytime you saw something that either of us was doing that could benefit from your point of view, you would give it to us because we're committed to pushing each other higher. Now, there's a company called Elf Beauty that does a beautiful job of that as a part of their onboarding. They say to people, the next 3 years you're here, you're going to grow further and faster than you ever have. Get ready, but in return, you're going to get very candid feedback and you have to give it to others, but we're doing it out of love.
Right.
We're doing it out of love and support. And they have crushed it. This is an organization that doubles market cap every year. This is an organization that has made all the big beauty companies run for the hills. When I talk to big beauty companies, they always mention Elf as their primary competitor. So, this idea, probably the biggest then is that you get your feedback, you get your energy, you get everything from your boss. If I can shift that we get that from each other, then that's game changing. And imagine, Nikki, what that would do for your leadership. I've had leaders who are entrepreneurs say that they have freed up enough time to start a new business while they were running this business because of the teamship stepping up to meet them as leaders of the team.
Without a doubt. It was interesting. There was a podcast that we had a few months ago, and there was a leader who was talking about how it's their responsibility to articulate the whole vision to the team. And I thought to myself, sure, to an extent, you've got to point north, but how tiring to be the sole decision maker for everything. That's just got to be exhausting. And to your point, means that you are a slave to the business.
You're radically curtailing. This is the book, by the way. This is the galley copy. By the time this comes out, the hardcover will be out.
I was just about to say, I don't have the actual physical hard copy yet, but I can't wait to get it and highlight that thing.
There's another big one, which is, you've heard of Agile.
Mhm.
And I think that when organizations think about adopting Agile, some Agile coach comes in and all of a sudden becomes a bunch of spreadsheets and it's overwhelming. And then again, if you're a tech company, you're of course using Agile for your software development. Maybe you're
Right.
using Agile for program management. But in the volatile world that we're living in today, if we're not running our companies on short Agile sprints, we're going to be lost. Um, IBM was actually a great example. Arvind, who's a very impressive leader, the new CEO over at IBM, they were able to re-engineer their entire sales organization in 1 month agile sprints. So basically, what you do is you have these sprints of work where every hill of work is earnestly plowing forward. And at the end of the month, you pause, you do that report out, but the whole organization beats the hell out of it, stress tests it, and makes you adapt and adopt so that everybody's on board with where we've been and where we're struggling and where we're going. And now let's go. And if you do that repeatedly, you never get off course. If you do that repeatedly, you're always getting insight from outsiders. We did this during the pandemic every day. We practiced agile. I called it crisis agile every day. During the pandemic, we woke up and we're like, what the hell happened yesterday? What do we need to do today? How do we survive? Let's get all the information, and our tentacles are up. We were attuned. All of that was beautiful. And then we've stopped. So the ability to move from crisis agile to agile as your operating system, I don't know who you advocate for, but there's a lot of entrepreneurial operating systems, one actually called that, that are out there. But at the end of the day, they all boil down simply to adopt agile sprints as your primary operating cadence.
Absolutely. And I'd love to hear, as you're talking about becoming even more agile in how you move and how you lead, and how your team is pivoting in times of need. And I think since COVID, that hasn't slowed down much. The world is moving faster and faster and faster. And I think agility is becoming far more important than it ever has been. And part of the ability to do that, I have to imagine, is in line with being able to give feedback and being able to be radically candid with your team, because anything that we don't talk about just makes everything take longer.
Yeah, I mean, the volatility. This is the book that I wrote during the pandemic called Competing in the New World of Work. I created a new managerial philosophy I call radical adaptability. And so many of the practices come to life here that breed. One of the benefits of this book is radical adaptability.
Yeah.
If you practice this, your team will never let you malaise into failure over 2 quarters when we could have adapted, in the first month and gotten back on track. And a lot of it is just being curious, bringing in new inputs always from the outside. It's critical.
I'd love to ask you, we talked before we jumped on, the majority of our listeners are either entrepreneurs or business owners or executives, which doesn't always mean that they're a CEO, a CFO. Sometimes they're a manager of several teams, or a mid-level manager wherein they have someone above them and a team that they're managing. And if they're listening to this saying, gosh, this would help my company so much if they followed these rules, and yet I'm not the decision maker for the whole company, how do they bring it in?
Yeah, that's
Where do I
great. I mean,
start?
that's the point.
You're like, that's it.
You've got a group of, first of all, there's another shift in one of the 10, which is redefining team. Team should not be your org chart. Everything we talk about in this book should be applied to the people you need to get the job done. So the first question is, for each of your teams, meaning every critical um, North Star, every big hill you're taking has a team. Some of them are your employees and some of them are not. Once you identify that group as your team, now that group needs to negotiate a new social contract for how we work together.
Right.
So you as a leader, you don't need to have the authority. All you need to do is buy a book and follow the practices. The simplicity of the book is practices. I'm not even going to try to change your mindset. There's a wonderful old phrase: you don't think your way to a new way of acting. You act your way to a new way of thinking.
Ooh, I like that.
Practices change culture. Simple practice change culture. And what would happen is, one of the things I love to do is to take this book into CIO organizations, because CIOs are working with all parts of the company. They're technology advanced, so they don't mind using the technology tools for collaboration. They should be using it already. They're already most likely using Agile in different parts of their business. If I can get a tech CIO to adopt these principles and practices, that begins to have tentacles out to the organization, because everybody who's engaging with the CIO's teams start to learn these practices. You
Yes.
could be on a team and say, hey, I would like to try something. I've been working on this initiative. I'd like to have the team stress test it. People are like, what does that mean? I'd just like to give my report out, but instead of a standard report out, here's a Google Doc, and I'd like you to put your name in. And here are 3 questions I want you to answer while you're listening to my report out. What challenges do you have for me? What innovations would you offer? And where might you help? And would you mind? I'm going to even put you into some breakout rooms and you can talk about it and then give me double barreled feedback when you're done. That has just been a tipping point of helping change your team. And you didn't have to be the leader to do it.
Well, and you don't have to come up with all the ideas either. That's the beauty of this method, is that
Exactly.
you all of a sudden as a leader are released from having to come up with literally everything. When you hire a really capable team around you, it's best to just let them be the very capable human beings they are, right?
Yeah. And unfortunately, so many entrepreneurs don't.
Yes.
We squeeze the lifeblood out of our people through our control. Most entrepreneurs are very insecure people, and we are not sometimes the best leaders. And I have suffered from that in my career as an entrepreneur, and I've failed in businesses in the past as well, because in retrospect, I didn't give my people as much latitude as they should have. And adopting agile practices, letting the team be much more inclusive in their collaboration. These are simple practices that put guardrails on you as a leader to be a better leader.
Yeah. Keith, I'd love for you to expand on, I'll use myself as the example. I'm a leader in the real estate space. That's the company I founded and sold, and the organization that I operate in. And when you're in a time like it has been for the past, I would say, year or so, you're sort of a wartime leader right now in the world of real estate. And I find that when we're having these conversations with other real estate leaders, they're coming from the space of the cost is too high to allow my team to make these decisions, because I'm on the tightrope of keeping the business viable or hitting the KPIs for shareholders if you're public or whatever it may be. And so then they end up holding all of their cards tight to the vest. They end up making all the decisions for the organization. I see this very commonly in all organizations, but I'm using my industry right now as an example. So what do you say to that leader who says the cost is too high to let people fail?
Small bites at the elephant is the only way to eat it. And so, there's 37 practices. So some of these practices will be more resonant to you than others, and you'll want to try them on. And so the opportunity is, don't get so overwhelmed. Just try it. Try a stress testing exercise, right? Try a celebration circle. So a lot of us as entrepreneurs, we're always drive, drive, drive. We don't spend a lot of time celebrating ourselves. And we don't spend a lot of time celebrating others. The ability to have the team own some of that. Once a month, have the team go around and speak one person on the team that they're most grateful for and why, outside of the leader, and have them do that. That's amazing, because you start to put energy into people's step. The other thing you also do is, if one person after 3 months has never been celebrated, starts to send them a message, doesn't it?
Yep.
So there's a lot of ways, simple practices can start to make the change. And then once you start to see them working for you, you'll have less fear around the control grip that you think you have to have.
I love that. I could continue to get free coaching from you for
Happy to.
probably the next 10 hours,
Happy
Keith.
to. We're going to sell 2,000 books here today. So I am perfectly comfortable if you want to keep going.
We most certainly are, because I know so many entrepreneurs listen to these things, and you and I had this conversation at the beginning. One of the biggest challenges in theorizing some of these is that a leader's listening to this saying, "Hey, I run a real company, and I know that thing wouldn't work." And everything you're telling me, and even knowing what wouldn't work or what isn't working right now, everything you're telling me are clear, concise, very easy, frankly, and simple solutions that you intuitively know would work. So why aren't we doing them?
Well, now we're going to be able to. And I know we talked about this, but this is probably a pretty good tee up time. I am so mission bound to landing this in the lives of your listeners. So the book has given away everything that I teach my own coaches, right? But on top of it, just yesterday, I spent an entire day after having spent several weeks, but yesterday I spent a day in studio. Every chapter comes with a video as well, where here's the idea. I want the team, I want you to buy the book for the whole team, and the team reads the book together as a book club. And after every chapter, you do your diagnostic, you talk about the commitment to shift, and you start trying on some of the practices. And I've given you a video of me coaching the team along the way. So hopefully this is a real motivation for folks. And I'm just trying to make it as easy as possible. A lot of people have said, that I'm cannibalizing our business, but I think this is such a crucial space that is not awakened to. Moving from leadership to teamship, moving from hub and spoke to co-elevation, freeing up leaders and having teams step up and giving them a rule book on what it means for them to step up. I think it's a brand new space. I'm really excited about it.
I think it's also a space that you're doing a beautiful job in the book and in our conversation today of translating into a very new world for any leader.
Exactly.
And a disparity between a group of people who have sort of become very used to, or frankly, grown up in a very virtual world, coinciding with a group of people who have grown up in a very physical world. And I do see a lot of companies having a sort of war over the best way to do things when they're coming from two completely different environments. And I think this allows you to bridge the gap and come up with a common language.
And simple practices again, because it's very intimidating to think about using technology differently. I've spoken to the CEO of Google and the CEO of Microsoft, both about this idea of, listen, why are people, when they have the tools available to them, not using them?
Right.
And both of them point to folks like you and me, that it's our job to get out there and evangelize for how much better it is to start practicing what I call 21st century collaboration, not old school meeting based, dragging people through, meeting after meeting and having cycle times of getting shit done that's so long when these young agile companies come in and disrupt the hell out of you.
Yeah.
So yes, I just want to give people small bite-sized practices that I know they can adopt.
And I'm so excited for them also to have access to the videos, because I know some of us can read it and sort of conceptualize it, but really we need someone to walk us through step by step. This is how you implement it, which I know is exactly what the videos do. So we're going to drop that in the show notes for those that want to pre-order the book, which I would highly recommend. I was lucky enough to get an early copy, and I'm going to pre-order it just so I get your videos, Keith. So thank you for that. And so we'll drop that in the show notes for all of our listeners. But Keith, we always ask at the end of this podcast, which I wish we weren't gearing up to the end, but I want to make sure I ask you, what's the one thing that you would leave our listeners with? What's the one thing you want them to take away from this conversation?
I think you said it earlier. If your audience is highly entrepreneurial, and even if they're not, you don't have to lead alone. And that's how we came up with the title. Originally, the title was just Teamship, because we wanted to teach people that there's a whole different way of thinking leadership versus teamship. But I fell back on my original book, Never Eat Alone, and realized you don't have to lead alone. Your team can step up and meet you in ways that you can't even imagine now, but your old habits as a leader are stopping them from doing it. You need to change how you are as a leader, and they need to step up and know how they need to change who they are as a team, and it's doable. We can make that flip. You can free up 30% of your time. You can have more joy and resilience in both yourself and the workplace. And it's very powerful, and it's necessary. We can't keep leading in the autocratic command and control ways that we've led before in a world that's as fast-paced change that it is.
And ultimately, it's about everyone having the ability to use these tools to be agile in that very fast-paced world, which I like I said, I can't wait to get my hands on the videos. And thank you for writing this. I think it is so necessary in the world. You've been obviously put a few amazing books into the world. Thank you for all of them. And I have to tell you, after this conversation today, I might be most excited for this one, selfishly. So thank you, Keith.
I'm excited too. Thanks, Nikki. Appreciate you.
Thanks everyone for listening. We'll see everybody next time.